Then it shut off again, and everything was quiet. But the radar went on. The radar were giving echoes. It was something out there.
Immediately, the team generate an optical spectrum of the photograph. The optical image splits white light into the different colors of the spectrum. The amount of each color present gives the team new information about the light source.
The funny thing was that it had all colors, like the sun. And the continuous spectrum, which we obtained, points towards that we have something like a star.
The data suggests the phenomena may not have any mass at all, just star-like lights flying through the valley.
This is the photo which shows the sharp angle during the movement. If this had any mass, you shouldn't expect it would be possible to make such a sharp angle with this high speed.
But Strand's team still have no evidence of what the phenomenon is or where it might be coming from.
Some say that there is something new mechanism in physics. Some claim that's a new part of our world which we haven't discovered yet.
If you were to ask me if there is any credible explanation for the reported sightings over Hestalen, there's nothing that I know of in atmospheric science that can generate lights in the sky, at least insofar as we can tell from the photographs.
The Hestalen phenomena continue to be seen to this day. And as long as they appear in the valley, Erling Strand is determined to unlock the mystery once and for all.
I hope we will manage to find out what it is, because no one has ever managed to find a solution on what it is. So maybe if it's something from our nature, if it's something from our universe, something new we will discover.
But the investigation has achieved one important goal.
In the beginning of 80s, people said that we were crazy on the media, in the newspaper. But the scientists, starting with instrument up here in Hestalen, and said that there was something.
They lived with it so many years now, so it's not any reason to be so much afraid of it anymore.
17th of June, 1977, Tancos Air Base, Portugal. A routine flight for José Francisco Rodrigues, a pilot in the Portuguese Air Force. 11:15 a.m. The wheels of his Dornier 27 lift off the runway. What Rodrigues doesn't know is that within the next hour, he would have a central role in one of Europe's most extraordinary UFO encounters, and that he'd be lucky to escape with his life.
O caso de Castelo de Bode é importante porque temos aqui significativo exemplo de uma interação física de aparente objeto não identificado com os instrumentos de bordo do próprio avião.
Rodrigues is now retired from the military and no longer talks about this shocking event. But his case was the subject of a full investigation by the Portuguese Air Force. UFO investigator Francisco Correa has obtained access to the military files on the incident.
This is a Dornier 27, a plane exactly like the one flown by Francisco Rodrigues. On the day of the encounter, he would have been flying solo.
The Dornier 27 is a German single-engine light utility aircraft popular among pilots for its aerial maneuverability. Although just 23 years old, Rodriguez is an experienced pilot, a sergeant with over 800 flying hours behind him. Rodriguez is flying over Castelo de Bode, a hydroelectric dam 85 miles from Lisbon. Less than an hour after takeoff, he notices a dark object through the clouds. He radios back to base to find out if any other aircraft are flying in the area.
Outstanding form airborne from runway 34, climbing to 2,000 feet inbound altitude of Aberdeen Dam.
Outstanding form confirm scope 3310.
He contacted the tower had nothing on radar, so he initiated a left turn.
Rodriguez maneuvers his aircraft to get a better view of the object.
And when almost completing that turn, he screamed. The control tower heard this scream.
At 2,000 feet, Rodriguez is face to face with something completely inexplicable.
At 11 o'clock, there was a big, round-shaped, dark object, about 12 to 15 meters wide. It stood there for 5-6 seconds, and it then, wow, went away.
As the UFO disappears, his Dornier begins to vibrate violently. Suddenly, the magnetic compass spins wildly out of control. And from an altitude of 2,000 feet, the plane slips into a dramatic nosedive.
The plane's engine was still working, but he just couldn't get hold of the plane. He was desperate, in panic, trying to get hold of the plane.
As the ground approaches, Rodriguez struggles to regain control of the aircraft. He opens the throttle, a life or death attempt to level the plane. Just above the dam, he manages to stabilize the Dornier. Francisco Correa has come to the Castelo de Bode Dam, where two witnesses observed the dramatic nosedive.
There were two shepherds here who saw the airplane and saw it nosedive. And they saw it go below this hill over here, and then they saw it, bah! When the pilot turned off his engine and started to pull it off on again, it made bah! And they saw it, then the plane going just above, nice and easy.
On landing, the pilot undergoes a full medical examination. Although shaken, he's in good physical shape and immediately reports the UFO sighting to senior officers.
Pilots are often reluctant to come forward and speak about UFO sightings. They fear that they'll be ridiculed, they fear that there might be adverse consequences in terms of their career.
But the Portuguese Air Force take the report seriously and launch a thorough investigation into the incident. 35 years on from the UFO sighting, historian Joachim Fernandes has gained access to the military files.
Well, this is Francisco Rodriguez report from the Castelo de Bode case. The letter from Air Force, as you can see here. The summary of his own case, Rodriguez case. And the report from pilot. Report from a sighting of an identified flying object.
Rodriguez describes the object as being up to 15 meters wide, 3 meters wider than his Dornier.
And also the sketch from the object that emerged from the clouds and the encounter next to 6-7 meters from the plane. It was a scary experience.
The first mystery. Why did this large object flying at high altitude fail to appear on radar? Chris Morshead was a radar engineer with the Royal Navy for 30 years and has full faith in the technology.
When it comes to reporting objects, radar is probably far more accurate than the pilot. At high levels, it would be extremely unusual for something that physically appeared in front of a pilot not to actually be picked up on a radar.
At an altitude of 2,000 feet, the UFO should have been detected. So the possibility remains that what the pilot saw was not a solid object at all.
Quite often you do get atmospheric situations where tricks can be played on the eye, and it very much depends on the pilot, the lighting conditions, the weather conditions around him as to what he actually sees. And it can be quite easy to make mistakes.
Since the 1950s, many UFO sightings by pilots have often been explained by a curious atmospheric phenomenon.
You can actually get mirage effects due to temperature inversions, stuff like that, which can actually sort of fool the eye into thinking that there's something there which actually isn't there.
Well, a mirage is essentially created by different layers in the atmosphere that have a different temperature, i.e. the air has different densities. And it's a bit like putting, say, a spoon into a glass of water. You see that the metal in the spoon is bent. The same happens with light passing through the atmosphere with layers of different density. So objects in the distance on the horizon can sometimes appear distorted, they can appear closer to you or further away.
But a mirage does not explain the most puzzling question of all. Why did the Dornier, an aircraft renowned for its handling, nosedive so unexpectedly whilst the engine remained operational? Professor Raoul Berengel explains the dynamics of flight.
You have a low pressure above the wing and underneath the wing a high pressure.
A wing is designed so the air moves faster over the top surface than it does over the bottom. The slow-moving air beneath the wing has a higher pressure, which gives the aircraft lift.
If this phenomena goes at very high speed aside from the plane, what happens? You just lost your lift. Then the plane plunges down.
A jet passing at high speed could have sent the Dornier into a nosedive. But it doesn't explain why the magnetic compass spun wildly out of control.
Well, in order to spin a compass, at that distance will be needed a force, a magnetic field generated by this object that goes around the plane. And a normal plane or a jet do not have such an amount of magnetic field.
Whatever the object was, remains a mystery.
That's an object that flies, and I don't know what it is, so it's a UFO.
But something else from that day adds an intriguing twist to the story. As Rodriguez slips into his nosedive, workers at the Castello de Bo Dam are dealing with an emergency of their own.
At the same time, pilot Rodriguez was experiencing his falling to the ground with his airplane. This hydroelectric dam was experiencing a huge, unexplainable drop of energy.
Power at the dam is restored. But the question remains whether these two strange incidents are connected, adding another layer of mystery to a puzzle that may never be completely solved.
The situation regarding UFOs is quite interesting. As an engineer myself, I'm a great skeptic. I always believe that there must be some rational explanation. Occasionally, though, there are those situations when you just can't explain the problem, the phenomena that you've seen. Whether or not that's spaceships coming from another world? Who knows? Personally, I find it hard to believe that it is. I think it's probably just a natural phenomena we haven't identified.
Dr. Greer's going to be right on. Let's get him on the show, Dr. J.
That's right, and we are bringing him on right now. Let's get Dr. Greer on. We're actually calling him live.
That's right. I like this live real-time action.
Dr. Stephen Greer. Dr. Greer, welcome to the show. Third Phase of Moon Radio.
Welcome to the show, Dr. Greer. This is Blake Cousins, and it's always good to have you back on Third Phase Moon. The viewers are fascinated by your knowledge, the Atacama alien, this contact in the desert. We're almost up to giving $5,000 of free tickets to the show, thanks to you, and everybody's excited to show up at the Joshua Tree. I know last year's event was quite incredible. There was a person right here in Hawaii named Reynolds Kamaka Vizioli. He's a kahuna. He claims he has contact with the star family, and he predicted that night there would be a major triangle formation that was going to show up over the Joshua Tree. And we put it out on Third Phase, and people claim that it really did show up the night you were there. Did you witness the triangle UFO, Dr. Greer?
Yeah, we did. And in fact, it's interesting. We did a similar thing in Arizona a few years earlier, and a very beautiful tetrahedral craft partially materialized. We got a photograph of it. I believe it's on our website, SiriusDisclosure.com, under the heading. If you go to, there's ET evidence, and then there's also CE5. But we have, a number of images. I'm pretty sure that one is up there. Certainly, it's in our collection. And what happened is that there was a couple hundred people out under the stars on this roof kind of terrace, and this same object, which is very, in two dimensions, it would look like a triangle, but you could actually see that it was turned, so you could see that it was a tetrahedron, which, by the way, for those of you who don't know, a tetrahedron is 4 triangles. It's an equilateral triangle on each of 3 sides, and they make a triangular base. But, of course, if you don't have an up and down coordinate, it's just basically 4 triangular sides. And these shaped craft have been seen, of course, for, I think, millennia. But we have had that happen, and sometimes they will be fully in this dimension, invisible. Sometimes they'll only be visible with a good night scope, and other times you'll only see part of it. You'll see an edge of it. In fact, when we were in, where were we? Also in Arizona a couple months ago, we had one of these appear, but what you saw of it was like 2 points of light that were moving together, and as it moved, the area around it blocked out the other stars. And so the only part of it that could be seen with the naked eye were these 2 points of light, but very large, moving right over the sky above us. And we actually had some amazing video of this type of event happening during these contact events. And just so people know, a CE5 is when humans set up the conditions and invite contact, as opposed to something that's an accidental sighting or what have you. So it's sort of a diplomatic initiative where we are welcoming them here within the aspect of the oneness that's within us, which is consciousness and universality of mind, and that, we think, is the foundation for a future of universal peace. So in that sort of ethical and philosophical construct, we do these protocols, and it's amazing how often we have these sort of things seen.
Doctor, go ahead, Blake.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. J. The connection between man and alien is quite profound, especially when the kahuna was here in Hawaii. You were over there in California at the Joshua Tree, and the prediction was there. This connection, I think, is global, like you've been saying. But what about, see, we're working on a movie, Dr. Greer, about, it's called Hangar 52, and we're basing it on knowledge that we received from the people in regards to abductions, the sightings, free energy. Is there a government cover-up? Is there a dark force? And we're thinking that is the government controlled by a dark alien race?
No, absolutely not. However, I mean, of course, it makes for a great conspiracy theory, and I think that there's so much information that I think is disinformation out there on this subject. Now, I mean, are there aspects of the government that are incredibly dark? Yes, but why do they need to be controlled by an ET civilization? I mean, it's sort of I think it's the cop-out that people come up with not to take responsibility for our own failings and shortcomings as human beings. And, humans have been doing horrific things and dominating each other and engaging in warfare for way too long, and I just think it's a bridge too far to say that, oh, this is because there's some force. Now, you can define perhaps evil as this kind of behavior, and if you want to look at it that way, but to say that it's extraterrestrial is, I think, really, there's no basis for that at all. However, I think there are people, ironically, within the government programs who want people to believe that, because there's no way to, how do you prop up a multi-trillion-dollar military-industrial complex worldwide? And we're spending $1 trillion in the United States alone, if you all in with intelligence programs, Homeland Security, black budgets, the Pentagon. How do you keep that kind of spending afoot if you don't somehow concoct a bigger enemy than, say, terrorism? And Leon Panetta, who I put a briefing together for him when he was the CIA director for Obama, his first CIA director, and he at one point he said, look, we're spending over $100 billion a year chasing 70 Al Qaeda members in the desert of Pakistan and Afghanistan, and how do you grow this sort of juggernaut and justify this kind of expenditure, which is, of course, impoverishing the world tremendously, without having a new enemy? And this is what, Carol Rosin and Werner von Braun, the guy who invented the rocket for Adolf Hitler, told Carol Rosin on his deathbed, that basically that they were absolutely concocting events and trying to brainwash the public that there would be a threat from outer space, even if it's only one or two species that we should then unite against, like the movie Independence Day, so we can, quote, kick alien butt, quoting Will Smith in that movie. And, I've spoken to too many people in the intelligence community, as well as Hollywood, who know that that's the agenda. But unfortunately, the UFO and New Age subculture have taken this stuff hook, line, and sinker, and in my sense, it's a tragedy of brainwashing.
I wanted to ask you also, with Hangar 52, we are trying to showcase the good side of humanity, and like you said, there is a dark and evil side of it as well. There's an equal point in the middle, and I guess that's the way it's going to go on forever, but we are trying to put a good light on things. But we also want to delve into, in the movie Majestic 12, Dr. Greer, does it exist?
Well, it's had various names since the 40s, and, does that name still be the one, would that still be the one that's current? I seriously doubt it. Was there a group, really, it's Majesty and Magic in some documents I have that are as recent as the 90s and the 2000s? Yes, it has existed, and basically it's a committee, not just American, that has maintained the secrecy and the counterintelligence programs. Now, the disinformation and counterintelligence programs is a big part of it. And the people that I've met with over the years, I have over 550 people who worked in classified projects have dealt with this subject. And if you go to our website, we have several dozen that are actually on videotape talking. But for every one that's on our website, there are at least 10 that won't go onto an interview that I personally have met with. And what you find as you put this mosaic together is it's a whole complex picture you have to put together carefully, is that so much of the information on this subject has been, quote-unquote, leaked by the intelligence community, but it's really pre-positioned disinformation that's designed to have a certain effect. One effect is to discredit the subject because it just is so ridiculous. The other, however, is actually to manipulate people with fear. And if you look at it, if you look at how demagogues, whether it's been religious leaders or political leaders or different kinds of entities over the last several thousand years of human history, is that one of the chief ways that humans have been able to be manipulated is to makes them afraid of something that's, quote, other. So, for many, many years, it was one, race or one ethnic group. It's still today all over the world. Look at the Middle East, one religious group against another. It may be one ethnic group. If you go to Africa, there are tribal groups. And, Rwanda, you had the Tutsis and the Hutus. It's, some like 800,000 people were butchered, a decade or two ago. And what you see with that is that there's a tendency for people to hate and be afraid of anything that's really different from them. And even if it's not very different. I mean, for years in Ireland, you had Protestants and Catholics. Okay, here, they're all Christian, they're white, they're living on this little island, and they're blowing each other up like there's no tomorrow. So the problem with that is that people who are trying to get a lot of centralized power know that they can do that if they can set the populace against each other and play them off each other. And, there was an amazing book written some years ago about how in New Zealand, the colonialists turned one peaceful native tribe against another so that they would enter into warfare, so that they would be weakened, so the colonialists could then dominate the entire area. And that kind of Machiavellian, very deceptive action is really what goes on. What's unfortunate is that the UFO subculture has become the chief vector or vehicle, you might look at it, for a lot of this terrifying information to come out, so that there'll be people in a camp of, there are good ones and there are bad ones and we're going to choose sides, and it's Star Wars all over again. I mean, this is like, a wet dream, I hate to say that, for the intelligence community to have people, brainwashed this way. And what I think that, when I met years ago, I got a document. It's in the film very briefly, Sirius, which you can see at our website, SIRIUS is the name of the film, and it came out last year as the biggest crowdfunded film in history. And what happened is, in this document, although they didn't spend much time on it in the movie, I would have liked to spend more time, is that it was from the Strategic Studies Institute, and it was talking, this is 1996, about creating a global abduction cult and to simulate human being abducted by aliens that would be done with very advanced aircraft and the stagecraft of creatures that look like aliens but aren't. And this document is in black and white, and it's an authentic document describing this program. Now, if that's all there was, I'd say, well, that's interesting. But then I've met with so many men and women who've been in these projects. I remember talking to a man who had been in a program back in the 70s. It was the late 60s and 70s where they were doing this. And he says, oh, yeah, back then we didn't have as good a stagecraft, as they called it, as we do now. But we were able to get these anti-gravity devices and have people appear to be aliens. And they would use various chemical substances, electromagnetic weapons, and they would engage in various types of abductions and also mutilation events back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and for livestock. And he says we were doing that because we knew that that would make its way into the tabloid media and the UFO subculture and begin to start this slowly snowballing effect of fearing everything alien. So that's sort of how the game is played. It's been played for thousands of years by despotic demagogues, whether they be religious figures or political figures. And there's always an agenda behind it. The agenda behind it is to manipulate people through fear. And I think that, one of the big challenges of this era right now is for people to transcend and see through that. And it's like the old Who song, we won't be fooled again. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people have been fooled. And the idea that these programs aren't very well funded and extremely sophisticated in the technologies they have, it's just a wrong idea. They are well funded, albeit illegally, and they are very sophisticated in the technologies they have, and also in the ability they have to stage something and fool people. So I think you have to view so much of this with an eye of, it's sort of like, is it real or Memorex? The old commercial years ago about the audio tapes. is it actually an ET event, or is it something masquerading as ET or alien for the purpose of psychological warfare, like the Benowitz case that everyone probably knows about, the Air Force Office of Special Investigations case back in the day in the near Sandia National Laboratories in Kirkland Air Force Base, where they really did stage not only a human abduction, but a whole series of things and documents to put people off the course. Now, what a lot of people don't know is what they were really trying to hide, aside from putting out the false information, is that there was a woman that Paul Benowitz knew that had actually seen near Kirkland and Sandia a man-made anti-gravity propulsion device that looks like a UFO. And in order to sort of brainwash her into thinking that was not ours but alien, they set up this whole series of things that Richard Doty and others were involved in. And I think that this is a real problem because, you can't take things at face value, and when you do, you're going to find that you're just being played by some very sophisticated people who have a lot of experience manipulating mass markets and mass media and subcultures into a certain type of reactive or reactionary perspective. And I'd say, well, you can never prove a negative, so you can never prove that there are no civilizations out there that may not have our best interest at heart. But let's say even if that were true, what's your response going to be? Is your response going to be more war, i.e. Star Wars, interplanetary systems that are going into war? Well, if you understand technologies that are these scalar electromagnetic weapon systems, you can take out an entire planet with a system like that. So if hydrogen bombs and atomic bombs would leave the world uninhabitable, these systems are even worse than that. So there is only one path forward, and it's peace. And it's not as exciting as a horror film about aliens. It's not as titillating about finding a new group of people. You can't overtly be a racist, and you can't overtly hate women, or you can't. Now they're wanting to find a way that people can overtly hate something. Well, what's the next something? Well, it's another system out there, another star system that we have to hate. It's a very convenient thing. It's tragic, but it plays into this sort of collective experience of humanity in our recorded history of ethnic groups, religious groups, political groups going to battle, going to war. And you look at the last 100 years, we've killed something like 200 million of our own species in warfare on this planet, and often for things that are just ridiculous. And yet that's something that is, unfortunately, one of the chief organizing principles of the current world order is an us versus them military, industrial, centralized governmental complex. And if they really want to be able to take that to the next level, they've got to find another enemy. So this is, I think, what's really deeply behind so much of the information that tends to scare people and turn people into these sort of dualistic camps of us versus them.
Now, Dr. Greer, we are an extremely primitive species with this tribal warfare. Like you just said, these 200 million people that were killed. And obviously the next step in evolution is people need to realize that, we are the same because there's others out there. And isn't there some sort of federation, galactic federation out there that's awaiting us to ask them? Or are they waiting for us to have peace?
There is. I mean, there's a very large network of interstellar civilizations that have been observing our development for a very, very long time. Now, my view on this, stepping back and looking at the last, say, 100,000 years, most of which isn't recorded, it's been a process of humans going from tribes to city-states, Greece and the Trojans, and then going to nations and nation building, and now to something resembling of an interconnected global society, although highly dysfunctional. And then the next step, obviously, would be to become interglobal, interplanetary. However, that ticket, to get to that next stage, the requirement is that you have become at least nominally civilized so that you're not murdering each other by the millions. We haven't made that leap yet. So unfortunately, our technology has advanced enormously, from muskets and cannons and things of this sort in the 1800s and 1700s to thermonuclear weapons and things that are classified weapons that are even more fearsome, as well as technologies that are very, very advanced. So we have developed technologies ahead of our social and spiritual development, and that is exactly the window, that's exactly the period when a species such as ours is at greatest risk, not only to ourselves, but I know I sound like a doctor here, but not only dangerous to ourselves, but dangerous to others. Now, interestingly, if someone comes into my emergency department, I'm an emergency doctor by training, who's a danger to himself or others, they get committed to a mental facility. And I had a friend who was a Harvard psychologist. He was hilarious, and he had had an encounter outside Washington that was amazing. And he said to me, he says, yes, well, the Earth right now is the intergalactic insane asylum because we're acting completely like a bunch of crazy people. And I said, yeah, I know. So, one of the things is we have to become nominally sane. And it's not that we're going to all become perfect or enlightened. I'm not, and I doubt anyone listening is. However, we can at least stop murdering each other by the millions and setting up these systems that are designed to manipulate people into larger and larger and more expensive battles. And I think that's something that can only be changed by the people, because there's so much power that is centered at the top of this food chain of exactly what Eisenhower warned us about, the military-industrial complex, which is now the military-industrial financial laboratory research complex. And at the deepest levels of it are folks who really do want to be able to maintain control over not just American or British population, but a global population by presenting an existential threat that is not human. And I think that drives so much of the agenda of the false information, the concocted cases, the stagecraft. Now, have there been people who have been horrible victims of this? Yes. And, a lot of people, when they've heard me say this, say, well, you're not very sympathetic to people who've been injured or abducted. I said, no, I'm very sympathetic. Where I differ is the conclusion of who's doing it and what's behind it. There was a physicist who used to work out at Pine Gap, the facility near Alice Springs in the center of the continent of Australia, and brilliant man, and he was talking to me about how they had been manufacturing for years these creatures that look like aliens, but they're actually man-made kind of bio-nanotechnology creatures that have been used in abductions and have really been very persuasive for a lot of people thinking that they had an encounter with an alien when it was actually something that people were making that was some excellent stagecraft. And I say excellent in the sense of very well done, but diabolical and absolutely evil. And so I think that, until